Hello everyone and a warm welcome to Economicspedia. So today we are here to have a discussion from the developmental economics, and the topic, as you can see written on the board, that is Rostow's growth model, or it is also known as the stage theory of economic development. Okay, so in this session of today's, we are mainly going to cover the main idea and the statement of Rostow's growth theory, and followed by that we will also be moving towards the criticisms of the same. So before discussing the main idea and the concept of Rostow's theory, let's take a look at the past year question of Indian economic services. So here I have a question paper. You can download the same question paper from the website, the official website of UPSC. You can find the link below in the description box. So this paper is paper 2 of I.E.S, and this section is section B, question number 4 that we are going to solve. Let me read it out the question for you. You can see by yourself, those who have the question paper, and I am reading out for those who don't have one. So the question says to discuss the Rostow's stage theory of economic development. So it's the same theory, the same question they have asked us. We need to discuss the theory. So that's what we are going to do in this session. Well, as I have mentioned that this question is from section B of 2018 paper 2. Now let me give you the guidelines of this section 2. Many of you know. For those who don't know, please take a note that you have a word limit, and the word limit for section B of I.E.S is 200 words, and the marks of, as per 2018, the marks distribution is 15 marks per question. Okay, so this is the basic criteria that you need to know while preparing for any exam. That is, what's the marks distribution, what's the word limit, is there any word limit or not. Okay, so moving on to today's discussion, that is Rostow's growth theory or stages of economic development. Let's begin. So the basic idea that I am talking about, the idea of this growth theory. Okay, so this idea of Rostow's growth theory is mainly based on the key concepts of Harrod-Domar model. Harrod-Domar model. Okay, on the basis of the key concepts of this model, the basic idea of Rostow was developed. In 1952, Rostow published his famous book, The Process of Economic Growth, on the basis of the key concepts of Harrod-Domar model. So, the famous book was published in 1952, and in 1960, Rostow published the book named Stages of Economic Growth, The Stages of Economic Growth. And in that book, he has described the process of economic growth. And that's why it is known as the stages of economic growth as well, the same theory. Okay. Now what happened? Why it's raised such a real sensation among all the economists? The main concept that you need to grab here is that the idea of Rostow's saving ratio and the capital output ratio, in order to reach the takeoff stage so that the economy can be self-sustained in the economic development process, that this area raised a real sensation among all the economists as well as the policymakers. Okay, so this is the main background that you need to know while going through this model. Okay, now let me come to the stages of economic growth. So there are 5 stages of economic growth that has been described by Rostow. The 5 stages, 5 stages of Rostow. Okay, let me just give you the full name of Rostow. It is Walt W. Rostow. Okay, he has formulated the whole model. Alright, now moving on to the 5 stages. Number 1 stage is the traditional society. Traditional society. Number 2 is the preconditions of takeoff. And number 3 is the takeoff stage. So this takeoff stage is really important, as itself was mentioned by Rostow. Okay, and this is one of the important stages of the 5 stage. And number 4 is the drive to maturity. Okay, and finally the 5th stage is the age of high mass consumption. High mass consumption. Okay, so these are the 5 stages into which Rostow has divided the process of economic growth. Alright, let us discuss one by one in details, because the question says to discuss the stages of economic growth. Okay, so starting with the traditional society. Now, as the name suggests, the traditional society, right? So traditional means there will be indulgence and inclusions of the agricultural society as well as the hierarchical social norms. So these things were there as a characteristics of this traditional society. So one interesting fact about this traditional society, that it is based on the pre-Newtonian science and technology. So basic idea number 1 is that it is based on the pre-Newtonian science and technology. Okay, and as I have said that there is the presence of agricultural society, and along with that there is social norms or society, you can write. Okay, so in short, the traditional society can be described in few words like this. Okay, now let's move to the second stage of the stages of growth. Now the second stage is the preconditions for takeoff, right? So preconditions for takeoff. Now, how we can characterize this stage of Rostow's stages of growth? Now, this stage can be characterized by the application of modern science into agriculture. Okay, so this is the first point. Modern science into agricultural sector. Okay. Second point. Okay, now for this precondition takeoff stage, we can take the example of Europe in the early 17th century. If anyone wants to give it as an example, it is Europe in 17th century. Next is that in order to arrive at this stage of economic growth, 2 conditions need to be present. That is, 2 conditions has to be there as a prerequisite in order to reach this stage of economic growth. So 2 conditions has to be there. So under these 2 conditions, the first one is that the presence of entrepreneurs. Presence of entrepreneurs has to be there, that is entrepreneurs must be present. And number 2, the second condition, so first condition is related to the entrepreneurs, that is they have to be present, and the second condition of the 2 condition is that there has to exist the investors who will be there in order to give the financial support to the ideas. So next is the presence of investors. Okay, one is entrepreneurs and the other one is investors. Alright, so these are the two conditions So these are the two conditions in order to reach this stage of economic growth. Now let's move to the third and the important stage, that is the takeoff stage. So takeoff stage, as I have said, that this is a very important stage. Now this stage is like a watershed. So this has a characteristic of by the presence of a normal and steady state. So the basic characterized is the appearance of normal steady state rather than the short bursts of sudden activity. Okay. Next is the next point under this takeoff stage is that here the Rostow has clearly mentioned that the ratio of saving and investment to the national outcome or national output has to rise to at least 10%. Okay, so here the next characteristic is the ratio of saving and investment to the national output. This has to increase to at least 10% in this stage. Okay, so this is a very important criteria. The third point is that here also this stage has been characterized by two additional characteristics. Okay, so as two additional characteristics, number one is that the manufacturing sector has to grow at an increasing rate, or it has to grow, that is the manufacturing sector has to grow at an increasing rate. And the second additional characteristic is the presence of a framework. The framework can be either political or social, but that framework has to be present in order to support the expansion of this modern sector. Okay, so the second one says a framework, because this framework is going to support the expansion of the modern sector. Expansion of modern sector. Alright, and this stage, this takeoff stage, Rostow has claimed this takeoff stage as the industrial revolution. Okay, so this is again a very important thing. So this stage has been also been defined by Rostow as an industrial revolution. Okay, so this is the description and the characteristics of the third stage, that is the takeoff stage. Now we move towards the fourth stage, that is the drive to maturity stage. Okay, so drive to maturity. Now this stage is the intermediate stage between the takeoff and the maturity stage. Okay, so this is the intermediate stage of the two. Now in this stage, it takes time. This stage, in order to reach this stage, it takes some of the time. And there, in this whole time period that we are concerning, in this period there has to be a continuous process of growth. It's not that the stage is there but nothing is going on into the economy. It is not like that. So here what happens is that the continued process of growth is present. And in this stage, the level of investment that has to increase to 20% of the national income. That is, if we write it, so level of investment that has to increase to 20% of national income. This is the basic criteria of this stage, and this is the main important criteria. And as I have mentioned that this is a long period, so it is assumed that it takes approximately 60 years in order to, the average years are approximately 60 years. Okay, this is the drive to maturity stage. Now let's move to the fifth and the final stage of Rostow, that is the age of high mass consumption. So here this is the final stage and this is the longest stage. So first criteria is that this is the longest stage, right? Number two is that if Rostow has mentioned that as an example of US, United States of America, so US has taken approximately 100 years to reach this stage of economic growth. So that's why it has been mentioned that this is the longest of the stages. And this stage specifically has been characterized by the affluent population and the high mass production of the consumer goods and services. So here the basic characteristics is that we need to have affluent population and there is a high mass production or huge high mass production of what? The consumer goods. Okay, so this is the basic criteria and the characteristics of this stage of the economic growth. Okay, so these are the 5 stages of Rostow that we have discussed in great details, and with this the answer of the past year has also been solved. That is, it asked us to describe the stages of economic growth. These are the stages. Now in this session, as I have promised, that we will also discuss the criticisms of these Rostow stages of economic growth. So let's move to that part of the discussion. So the first criticism that we are going to discuss here is the unchanged technology and the saving rate. So while discussing the whole theory of the stages of development, Rostow was very much naive in nature. Why? Because the capital output ratio, if we talk about the capital output ratio, this ratio depends on the economic incentives as much as it depends on the exogenously determined technology. So this depends on economic incentives as well as on the exogenously determined technology, right? Whereas if we talk about the saving ratio from the model only, okay, saving ratio, so on what the saving ratio depends on? Saving ratio is dependent on the stable values and the attitudes as well as on the economic incentives. So this again depends on the economic incentives, just like the capital output ratio, but along with that we have a stable values and attitudes to save, right? So on these things, the capital output ratio and the saving ratio is dependent on. So it is very much difficult to find out the value of this capital output ratio and the value of this saving ratio. We cannot say the exact value of it or how it is changing. So it is very difficult to capture. However, in the starting of this session only, I have given you the brief idea of this Rostow stages of growth, where he has exclusively determined the saving ratio and the capital output ratio. Even in the third stage as well as in the fourth stage, he has given the cutoff or the threshold level through which and up to which the saving ratio has to increase. Okay, so this is very much difficult to capture, although Rostow has mentioned it in his theory. Right? So this is the first criticism. Let's move to the second criticism. The second criticism talks about saving and investment. What is it? The conversion of savings to investment. We have found exclusively in the whole theory of this Rostow in his stages of economic growth that nothing has been mentioned about the process of how the savings are being converted into investment. Rostow is silent on that aspect. So that is why this is a criticism. This is an area where it has not been mentioned that how the saving is being converted into investment. Although this is the only thing that Rostow has talked about in his whole theory, although not mentioning the exact procedure through which the conversion has taken place. So that is why this makes the second criticism of Rostow. And now let's move to the third criticism. The third criticism says that in the theory by Rostow we have found that he has divided the whole process of economic growth into 5 different stages. Now here the point and the criticism lies. Then how can exactly one distinguish the 2 stages, that at which point we consider that this economy is moved from suppose stage 2 to stage 3? At what point we can say this? That exact point or that exact definition has not been provided. So we can say that it is not possible that the whole process of economic development in any economy, it is not possible to divide it into stages. Okay, so because of that many criteria and many questions arises. So that's the third criticism of Rostow, that is stages of growth. How this has been done, it is again a area of question. So this is the basic idea of this Rostow stages of growth model or the stages of economic development. So this whole discussion we have done in a very crisp manner so that you understand the concept and remember it very firmly and try to write the answers in your own. So that is all about today's session regarding the past year solved as well as covering a topic from the economics, developmental economics. So if you find this video to be helpful enough, please don't forget to hit the like button, and if you are new to our channel, please subscribe to us. You can get the important concepts of economics from this Economicspedia. And one more good news I have for all of you who are preparing for this year's Indian Economic Services. If you have personal doubt or queries, you can send your doubts to us through our official mail ID, that is ecopedia02@gmail.com. We will give you the answer as soon as possible. So don't forget to contact us if you face any kind of problem anywhere. Looking forward to it. Thank you for watching this.